As you've observed, all the writing so far plays out in South Africa. Cruel, Crazy, Beautiful World is my virgin shot at writing a novel that is set in post-apartheid South Africa. What I was keen to do is look at the time of 2004, 10 years after democracy, and the idea was to look at how lives are perhaps lived in these spaces or interstices, in the gaps in a sense. In the past they were very defined, things were so polarized, and it seemed to me that in 2004 in South Africa there was a world that was far less defined, where all the old lines were blurring. What I was keen to explore in this novel is the way that there's always this dance in South Africa between how beautiful the country is, the music, the magic, the light, and the violence that seems endemic. It's a novel in two voices. The one narrative strand is lyrical. The other narrative strand is relentlessly cruel, and I had in mind the film No Country for Old Men. I've lived overseas for a long time. I originally went over to England a year before South Africa became a free country, and I've been travelling ever since. The dream is one day to live in South Africa again, if I can ever find a way of surviving by the pen, though it seems surreal living in Luxembourg. And I also feel, I'm very aware, to be honest, of being a tourist in my own country. I don't feel as licensed as Dion Mayer to deliver a verdict on South Africa now. Even in writing about South Africa in 2004, as I've never lived in post-apartheid South Africa, I'm writing of a country of my imagining. So I don't foreground the political, I let the reader infer the political themes from the pain and from the plight of individual stories. There's, I think in every scene that plays out in Karoo Boy and in Cruel, Crazy, Beautiful World, one's aware of the fabric and the texture of the land and the light that illuminates it. So I'm very conscious as I write of this stage that can be kind but can be cruel too, and of the myriad hazards that might waylay a character in a story too. So it's a land that's inherently ambiguous, but I think that's part of what this novel is about, the Africa where identities, destinies, fates are being forever re-scripted in a sense. There was a time under Mandela when the South Africa he dreamed of seemed possible. It seems to me that that dream of the rainbow country was so alive, however flawed and however wounded South Africa was. And I think, as Mandela tenuously holds on to life, there's still this illusion that wonderful South African paradise will still happen. But I think that's something of an illusion, and it seems to me that in the end, under Zuma, South Africa has a black ruler, but it's the same kind of man at the end of the day ruling South Africa. That it's just another hegemonic male form of power that is ultimately macho. So the skin color of the ruler has changed, but in some ways, the way that power is wielded in South Africa may not have changed so radically, and that's what's worrying. There are things that scare me. For one thing, this bill that has to do with the freedom journalists have to report on things in South Africa. But that's part of, I think, a worldwide trend towards a loss of freedom, individual freedom on that score. There are other things. A lot more South Africans are schooled, and that the level of education in science and maths, among other things, is low. So that there are a myriad worrying things, but at the same time, that there will always be individuals like Tutu who have not let go of the original dream Mandela had, and as long as there are individuals of calibre, and there is hope for South Africa. Well, it's hard as a South African, to my mind, to imagine writing in a place beyond Coetzee. I mean, he's so he casts a long shadow in a sense. So it's partly a bowing to the master in a sense, but at one level or another, all my writing is almost a kind of reply to disgrace in some ways, though it perhaps denies some of the magic and the music, the colour, this defiant, cocky sense of hope that's in the air in South Africa. So my writing is an attempt not to shy away from the things that Coetzee sees, but on the other hand also to draw the eye to what is beautiful in South Africa. Yeah. Partly because the song was, along with other songs by Johnny Clegg, was one of those things that peeled illusion away from my eyes and let me see what was happening in South Africa, behind the scenes, and when I was a schoolboy. The words of the song are a prayer, in a sense, by a father that his son will somehow survive the hazards that he has to navigate through in life. He prays that his son might experience blue skies, but in order to become a man he has to survive sharks and crocodiles and crooked politicians, and so the song gave me a kind of a framework for a novel. The other thing is that I just felt that there wasn't a word that encompassed the South African reality of post-apartheid, that it's so kaleidoscopic and ever-shifting, and that it's hard to put a finger on one way of describing the country. And I thought Clegg's words captured that sense of flow and of that dance, as I've intimated, between things beautiful and things cruel. For me, the writing almost mimics the cadences of poetry. I'm very aware of rhyme, of rhythm. As I write, I borrow from blues, but I always listen to music as I write. Masekela's jazz infuses the novel. Yeah, I'm quite keen for my novel to escape the old binaries of there being two sides to a story. It seems to me that there are a myriad sides to every story, in a sense, and I mean, Jabulani's story is one of a myriad Africans who've come to South Africa hoping to find a kind of place beyond poverty and persecution. The hard reality of things is that they often end up encountering persecution or some form of animosity once they arrive, and that it's a very, very hard thing, I think, coming to South Africa as a refugee, in a sense. And the whole story of Jabulani came to my mind when I was sitting at a bar by the sea in South Africa, and a man served me a beer, and I discovered that he hadn't always been a waiter, that he was a teacher in Zimbabwe, and that he'd lost his post after daring to mouth something subversive, and so ended up having to journey south. There is a sense in which he's a symbolic character. I know of no young man who is a half-coloured Muslim and half white Jew. There may be such a boy in South Africa, but it's more the idea that I think to be South African in the future, one may have to let go of old ways of defining things, and in a sense, metaphorically, that we may all need to become coloured. Yeah. Yeah, there's no doubt that I'm in awe of the Coen brothers, of Tarantino too, and I love the way that the absurd might colour a narrative, and that moment of ambiguity, as I think this is what you were intimating, where something that's quite macabre might be comical for a moment before you place it, before you kind of configure it in your mind. And I think that's something that you experience in Pulp Fiction, where you find yourself for a moment fleetingly laughing at the most unthinkable violence. Yeah, that'd be cool. That'd be magic. Yeah, that'd be a dream. Yeah, one of my novels is to be filmed, Karoo Boy, and so there's a film project in the pipeline. But I hope one day somehow to put my writing in Tarantino's hands. I think it'd be cool if he shot a film in South Africa. I can picture that. I'm very, very aware of naming characters. There are writers like Fitzgerald, among others, who I think use names metaphorically. I'm very aware not only of the music of the names, but of the way those names have travelled. And for me, I mean, Jerusalem, being a town that's neither solely Jewish nor Muslim, but is some kind of half kind of town, was very symbolic too. But the origin of that name comes from an old story by Goethe. In fact, Jerusalem's story is a free retelling of the sorrows of young Werther. The original story, there was a young man called Jerusalem who was a friend of Goethe's, who shot himself over an unfortunate love, and that it was the death of Jerusalem that cajoled Goethe to write up the story. Calling him Jerusalem was a nod to the original Jerusalem, who shot himself in 1772 or around then. And this is something Coetzee does. His Boyhood, his memoir or fiction. It was published in some places as fiction, in others as memoir. I love that idea of blurring those lines when it comes to genre. Just as, in a sense, I'm blurring the lines of whether Jerusalem is black or white. In a sense, how do you put a finger on his colour, his identity? Gecko in Blood Orange is me. It's the story of my boyhood under apartheid. Calling him Gecko gave me the freedom to colour in beyond the lines of truth, to invent things, and now and then just see how, if I'd made another choice, things might have played out. But at the end of the day, it's 2/3 my story, whereas the story of Douglas and Karoo Boy is an invented story, but Douglas is me too. And that is true of Jerusalem. Jerusalem sees the world as I do, a dreamer and a drifter and a poet. Hemingway is a mentor. Whenever I write, I have Hemingway in mind, but at the same time, his writing is rather streamlined, and I'm fond of colour, and I love imagery, and so I tend to be aware too of borrowing from Seamus Heaney, the Irish poet, and his love of evoking the feel and the fabric and the smell of things, and so I see my writing as a bid to fuse, in a sense, Hemingway and Heaney's styles. Voices, there are myriad voices there, among others, philosophically, Camus, and the L'étranger, the outsider, really colours Karoo Boy as a novel. It begins with the death on a beach, and I had Camus in mind as I wrote that. That's part of what I've always instinctively done. I've always written with film in mind, borrowing from filmic ways of shifting scenes along through cuts, and so a lot of the devices that writers might use to write a novel are lacking, and so as a reader you would experience that jolting shift, I think, from one scene to the next. A lot of the time I imagine putting up a camera on a tripod, and then I imagine what I would see if I looked through the camera lens, and what I would hear on that soundtrack. And it's not so much as if I'm writing a film script, but that I'm very aware of writing in a filmic way. And to anyone who reads my writing, whether in Paris or New York, to feel that they've travelled to South Africa, that they've felt the sun on their skin, and they've tasted the salt in the wind. I'm not fond of genre borders, just as I'm not fond of other forms of lines that were drawn under apartheid. And I think if there is hope for South Africa, it lies in us learning to live beyond or through the lines. And I think these things happen at an intuitive level. It's not so much a desire to colour the text, and yet I'm very aware of the innate music of those perhaps indigenous words, words that and the way that those words have travelled. A word like trek that was originally Dutch, and how that has travelled via Afrikaans into English. It seems sad to me to write a novel that would not let those words be heard as part of the soundtrack of the text. It makes the reading of my books in English very hard. It's just a love of the music of these words. This is all part of the tapestry of South Africa. It's that Afrikaans may belong in one box and English in another, and perhaps Zulu in another. Again, it's a blurring of borders. Free even from grammatical rules. Some of my English is ungrammatical. I have this habit of turning nouns into verbs, which I think makes life tricky for my French translator. So there is in my writing that yearning to be free. I think perhaps it has something to do with the very hard-handed schooling I had as a boy under apartheid, and being caned if I dared defy authority. I don't like being told that this is how you write a book, and this is how you write a sentence. I think if you, through a kind of poetry of words, if you're telling stories that somehow awaken empathy, then your writing becomes political. You're putting readers into the shoes of characters, and if they feel their pain, they feel their humiliation, they feel how snubbed and put down they are, then that moment of feeling becomes a political experience, because then as a reader you begin to feel the injustice of it. Even though I don't foreground my writing as political, I think at the level of feeling it is. There's no in my mind, I see myself as a political writer, even though perhaps it's obscured by poetry. I've begun to write a crime novel that plays out in South Africa, in Cork Bay, Cape Town, another harbour town story. I'm very drawn to writing about harbours, that idea of travelling to and fro, of folk coming and going, and of places that belong to the land, but almost seem to be so on the edge of it that they almost belong to other worlds too. In a sense, are ambivalent. Yeah. So I have this crime novel in mind that I've begun writing, and for the first time ever, I can imagine a character who might survive from one novel to the next. Dion Meyer is a South African writer who has cajoled me to have a shot at writing crime, so we'll see how it goes.